The first light of morning had barely touched the ridge when the air split with the sound of horses. At the edge of the frontier settlement, a half-dozen cabins slept under a veil of smoke from their own hearth fires, unaware of what rushed toward them. The dawn should have brought peace, the smell of bread, the crow of a rooster. Instead, it carried the war cries of raiders who descended like storm clouds. The settlement was small, more a cluster of families than a town. Most of the men had been out late in the fields, leaving their wives and children in the cabins. When the first shot rang out, it was not the hunters or farmers who answered, it was the women who screamed, clutching their children. Stumbling from doorways barefoot onto the hard dirt, the attackers moved quickly, skilled in striking fear before blades or bullets even found their mark. Horses thundered between cabins, scattering livestock, shattering fences, and dragging fire from torches to roofs that still held the night's cool. Smoke spread as panic bloomed. Among those caught in the chaos was Eliza, a young woman no more than 20, her hair undone, her body weakened from childbirth only weeks before. Her infant daughter lay in her arms, wrapped in a blanket patched together from whatever scraps of cloth her family could spare. Eliza's husband was gone out hunting deer to provide food, unaware that by the time he returned, his home might already be in ashes. She had been awake before dawn, nursing her baby by the dim glow of the fire. That was when she heard the first crack of rifles. Her heart seized, the baby startled in her arms, and in a rush she had run outside. What she saw was a nightmare. Riders circling, smoke rising, neighbors dragged to the dirt. The air, sharp and cold a moment before, turned chokingly thick with gunpowder and fire. Her instinct screamed only one command: protect the child. She pressed the infant against her chest, stumbling toward the woods behind the cabin. If she could reach the trees, maybe she could vanish into the thickets until the storm passed. But she hadn't taken more than 10 steps before a horse reared before her. A rider leaned down, face painted, eyes fierce. He shouted something she could not understand, a language sharp and fast. When she froze, clutching her daughter tighter, he swung off the saddle and strode toward her. His hand seized her shoulder with brutal force. Eliza screamed and tried to run, but the rider's strength overwhelmed her. He wrenched her aside, and with his other hand he ripped the baby from her arms. The infant wailed at the sudden cold, tiny fists flailing. It happened so quickly that Eliza could hardly process it. The man glanced down at the crying child with a sneer, then in a single careless motion tossed the baby to the ground. The small body struck the dirt with a pitiful sound. Dust rose around the fragile bundle. Eliza collapsed to her knees, shrieking. Her hands reached for her daughter, but a blow from the raider's arm knocked her back. She tasted blood on her lip, her eyes wide with horror. For a moment she thought she had witnessed her baby's death, that the life she had carried within her body, nourished with her own strength, had been ended with the casual cruelty of a stranger. The baby cried, shrill and pained, but alive. The sound was both torture and mercy. Eliza's arms twitched toward her, but another raider barked orders, pulling her away, binding her wrists with rawhide. She was dragged upright, her body fighting against the restraints, her eyes locked on the child still writhing in the dirt. The settlement burned around her. Other women were being pulled from cabins, children crying, men beaten down if they resisted. The sky above, stained with smoke, turned the sunrise into a cruel red. In Eliza's chest, terror and rage knotted together. Her baby was there, so close she could almost reach her, but the raiders treated it as no more than an afterthought, a nuisance in their path. This was the moment the story hinged upon. For most who witnessed it, the baby would have remained in the dirt, forgotten amid fire and fury. But not all the eyes watching carried only cruelty. Among the raiders stood a younger figure, a warrior not yet hardened into the ways of his elders. His gaze lingered on the infant where it lay, half buried in dust, crying out against the world's indifference. Something in him shifted, but that moment his decision would belong to the next part of the tale. For now, the raid at dawn had done its work. It had torn apart a family, broken the sanctity of a mother's arms, and set the stage for an act of defiance that would alter lives on both sides of the battlefield. Eliza's wrists were bound so tightly she could feel the rawhide cutting into her skin. Her shoulders ached from being jerked forward, stumbling wherever the raiders dragged her. Her mind, though, was not on the ropes nor on her own body. It was fixed on the tiny figure left behind in the dirt. Every cry of her baby pierced through the smoke and shouting like an arrow, searing her heart with helplessness. The man who had thrown the child down now mounted his horse again, unconcerned. To him, it had been nothing, a gesture, almost casual, as if tossing aside a stone that lay in his path. The baby's wails, shrill and persistent, drew only mocking laughter from some of the older warriors. One of them spat near the infant, muttering a few words in his own tongue, his tone full of disdain for the raiders. Cruelty was not always born of hatred but of contempt. A captive child was not a prize, it was a burden. A mother, however, could be forced to walk, to serve, to labor. And so the life she carried in her arms was seen as nothing more than dead weight, a fragile thing without worth. Eliza's body strained against her bonds. She cried out in a voice cracked by smoke, "Please, please, let me hold her. She's just a baby." Her words meant nothing to them. Some laughed, others ignored her. One raider cuffed her across the face to silence her. The world spun. She staggered, tasting blood again, but her cries would not be contained. My baby. My baby. She thought of how fragile the infant was, how soft her bones, how delicate her head. She remembered the first time she had held her daughter against her breast, the way tiny fingers curled instinctively around her thumb. That child, the most precious gift she had ever known, was lying in the dirt while men rode their horses around her. As if her existence mattered less than the dust their hooves kicked up, the baby's cries grew weaker, as if exhaustion was already taking her strength. Eliza's heart pounded with a mother's terror. What if she stopped crying? What if the silence came, sudden and irreversible? The thought made her knees buckle. Among the raiders, one of the older men barked something sharp and commanding. The others paused to listen. His words carried authority, though Eliza could not understand them. He gestured dismissively toward the child, then toward the horizon where the war party would ride next. His meaning was clear. Leave the baby. It was no use to them. Eliza screamed again, lunging forward, but the ropes dragged her back. One warrior sneered at her, his voice rough as he hissed something in broken English. Baby weak. You walk. The words struck her harder than any blow. They were discarding her daughter as one discards unwanted cargo. The realization shattered her, leaving her gasping for breath. Her world, once fragile but intact, was now tearing apart strand by strand. The cruelty of it went beyond the act itself. It was in the indifference. To the raiders, the baby was not even worth killing. She was beneath notice, as though her life had already been written off by those with the power to decide. But cruelty is never without consequence. Unseen by most of the warriors, someone else had noticed. The young Apache stood slightly apart from the others, his horse restless beneath him. He was not the leader, nor the fiercest, nor the most respected among them. Still more boy than man in the eyes of his elders, he carried a spirit unsettled by what he had just witnessed. His eyes, dark and alert, were fixed on the small figure writhing in the dirt. He could hear the baby's cries, cutting through the noise of fire and command. They sounded like something more than weakness. They sounded like defiance, life demanding to be seen, refusing to be discarded. Inside him, a war began. To side with the child meant opposing the will of those who led him. To remain silent meant letting the cruelty stand. His people had taught him strength, loyalty, obedience. But his heart whispered of something else. Honor. As Eliza wept, bound and broken, she did not see him watching. She did not see the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand hovered near the reins as if caught between two fates. For the raiders, the act of cruelty was already finished. They had thrown the baby into the dirt, and now they turned their thoughts to the spoils and captives they would carry away. But for the young Apache, the act was not an end, it was a beginning. In that moment, beneath the rising sun and the smoke of burning cabins, he made a choice that would alter the course of not only the woman and her child, but his own life as well. And when he finally spoke, his words would shock even his own people. The war band surged through the settlement like a tide that could not be held back. Smoke climbed from roofs, the crack of rifles echoed in the distance, and women were dragged into line with rough hands. Yet amid the noise and confusion, the young Apache warrior named Taza sat atop his pony, watching not with triumph, but with unease. Taza was not the youngest among them, but he was close. His first raid had been only a season ago, when he had followed the war party into the mountains and returned blooded, carrying a token from the fight. He had been praised then, told he was becoming a man. Yet deep within, a seed of doubt had been planted. Violence came easily to some, but not to him. He fought when commanded, struck when others struck, but the fire in his chest was different from theirs. He had grown up listening to his grandfather's stories around the fire. Tales of honor, of warriors who fought bravely but also protected the weak, who brought balance instead of cruelty. Taza had memorized those words, holding them as a compass. But as he grew, he saw how often the old stories were bent or forgotten in the hunger for vengeance and survival. The elders called it the way of things. Taza wondered if the way of things had to mean forgetting the humanity of others. Now, he looked at the infant lying in the dust. The sight pierced him in a way no blade could. A newborn, small and fragile, its skin smeared with dirt, its cries thin but insistent. No warrior had lifted a hand to kill it, but that made the act no less cruel. Abandoning it in the dirt was worse in some ways. It declared that its life was beneath notice. He felt something stir in him, anger, but not the kind that burned for blood. It was anger at dishonor, at injustice. He had seen enemies struck down before. That was war, but this was not war. This was contempt, and it unsettled him to the bone. He shifted in his saddle, his fingers tightening around the reins. His horse sensed his agitation, tossing its head and stamping the ground. Taza's heart pounded, though no one had yet challenged him. He knew what it meant to defy the band. His place among them was already precarious. He had not yet proven himself fully. They expected obedience, not questions. Still, his eyes kept going back to the baby. The infant's cries had grown hoarse, but her small hands still fought against the air, refusing to surrender. In those fists, Taza saw something strange strength, a spirit that would not accept silence. Eliza, the mother, knelt only a few paces away, her face streaked with tears, her wrists bound. She stared at her child with desperation, her whole body straining forward as if sheer will could bridge the distance. When her eyes flicked toward Taza, they met his for an instant. It was not long, not enough to speak, but something passed between them. A plea. A spark of recognition. And in that fleeting connection, Taza understood. This child was not an enemy. This woman was not just a captive. They were people, caught in the storm, clinging to one another against the cruelty of the world. The older warriors shouted to move out. Horses circled, captives were pushed into line, and the leader gestured toward the hills. The raid was over. The time had come to vanish into the wilderness before pursuit could gather. Still, the baby lay in the dirt. Taza's throat felt tight. He remembered his grandfather's words, spoken when he was only a boy. A true warrior carries more than a weapon. He carries the weight of what is right. Those words, long buried under the clamor of raids and blood, now burned like fire in his chest. He slid from his saddle. The movement caught the eye of a few nearby warriors. One frowned, muttering under his breath. Another barked something sharp in their language, questioning his intent. But Taza ignored them. His steps were steady as he walked toward the child. The cries grew louder as he approached, as if the baby somehow sensed salvation coming near. He knelt, his shadow falling across her small form. For a moment he simply stared, caught between worlds, the world of his people, demanding he ride on, and the world of his heart, demanding he act. Finally, he reached down. His hands, calloused from bow and spear, moved gently as he lifted the infant from the dirt. The baby's face scrunched, then softened against his chest. She quieted, a fragile warmth settling into his arms. Behind him, the camp erupted in protest. Laughter mixed with curses. Someone spat, another jeered, calling him foolish. But Taza stood, the baby cradled firmly against him, his jaw set. He turned toward the bound woman. Her eyes widened, disbelief and hope mingling in their depths. He gave her a single, quiet nod and unspoken vow. He had made his choice, and soon he would declare it aloud for all to hear. The war band had begun to move, urging the captives into a line, steering their horses toward the ridge. The raid was ending the way so many others had ended: swift destruction, plunder, and the taking of survivors. But when Taza lifted the baby from the dirt, the rhythm of the group fractured. The infant nestled against his chest, her cries softening into hiccuping whimpers. Taza held her awkwardly, unused to such tenderness, but his arms instinctively shifted to protect her. The other warriors turned their heads, their expressions ranging from confusion to mockery. "What is this?" One of the older men barked in Apache. His scarred face twisted into a sneer. "Leave it. That one is dust already." Taza said nothing at first. His gaze rested on Eliza, still bound, her face streaked with tears and soot. Her body shook from exhaustion, but when she saw her child alive and in his arms, a spark of hope lit her eyes. The leader of the band, a hard man with a hawk feather in his braid, spurred his horse closer. His voice carried authority, edged with irritation. "Taza, enough games. Put it down. We have what we came for." The warriors around him nodded. Some laughed, calling Taza soft. Others muttered darker things about weakness, about shame. Taza's jaw tightened. He glanced once more at the child, then raised his head. His voice, when it came, was steady, though his heart thundered in his chest. "No." The single word landed like a stone in a pool. The jeers stilled, the laughter cut short. Even the captives looked up, startled by the defiance in his tone. The leader narrowed his eyes. "What did you say?" Taza shifted his grip on the baby, cradling her closer, then turned so all could hear him. His voice grew louder, firmer, carrying across the burned-out settlement. "Both are mine now." A hush fell. The crackle of fire and the whimper of the baby filled the silence left behind. One of the older warriors spat into the dust. "Yours? What foolishness is this? She is a captive, and that child is nothing." Taza's gaze cut toward him, sharp and unwavering. "She is not nothing. She is alive. And so is her mother. I claim them. By my right as a warrior, they are mine." The band erupted into argument. Some laughed again, mocking him, saying he wanted a burden. Others shook their heads, muttering about broken custom. One even raised his hand as if to strike him, but stopped when Taza's eyes met his with an intensity that dared him to try. The leader dismounted, stepping closer until he stood only a few paces from Taza. His face was unreadable. but the weight of his authority pressed like a stone. "You claim captives as if they were horses?" he asked slowly. Taza did not flinch. "I claim them as life. I will guard them. They will walk with me." The leader's eyes flicked toward the woman, bound and trembling. "And if they slow us? If the child dies?" "Then I will bear them myself," Taza answered. His voice did not waver. "I have chosen. The mother and the child, they walk under my protection. Whoever touches them, touches me." The words stunned the group into silence. For a long moment, only the crackle of burning roofs and the distant cry of a raven filled the air. Finally, the leader gave a harsh laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You are young, Taza, perhaps too young to know what you carry. But you speak with the fire of one who believes his own words." He turned, remounting his horse. "So be it. You claim them, then they are yours. But remember this, if you fail, the shame will be yours alone. No one will bear it with you." The others muttered, some mocking, some disgusted, but they obeyed the leader's word. The line of captives shifted again, this time with Eliza stumbling forward, her wrists still bound. Her eyes locked on Taza and the infant in his arms. Taza moved to her side, lowering the baby into her arms with deliberate care. She clutched the child, sobbing, whispering thanks in words he did not understand but felt all the same. The warriors spat into the dirt, shook their heads, and pressed on. But Taza walked forward, taller than before. He had spoken his claim, and in doing so, had bound his fate to hers and the child's. For the first time since dawn broke, Eliza did not feel completely lost. Amid the ashes of her home and the chains on her wrists, there was this: someone had chosen not to abandon them. And though she did not yet know his name, she felt in her heart that the path ahead, terrible and uncertain as it was, had shifted. By nightfall, the war band had withdrawn deep into the hills, their horses restless after the long ride. They made camp in a dry arroyo where scrub brush clung to the banks and the sky above stretched wide and sharp with stars. Smoke from the fires mingled with the smell of roasted meat. Captives were tied in a line along the edge of camp, watched by guards who carried bows and rifles across their knees. Eliza sat among them, her wrists raw from the ropes, her baby pressed tight to her chest. The child had fallen asleep, exhausted, her tiny breasts fluttering against Eliza's skin. Fear still gnawed at her, but she clung to one certainty: they were alive. Alive because of him. Taza had remained near her all day, keeping pace with the others but never straying far. When her steps faltered, he slowed. When the baby whimpered, he shifted to shield them from mocking eyes. He said little, but his presence was enough to quiet her terror, though it drew the sharp edge of his people's scorn. That scorn erupted after the meal was eaten. When the warriors gathered around the largest fire, the captives watched from a distance, shadows flickering across their faces. The younger men laughed harshly, pointing toward Eliza and her child. One of them, older and scarred, raised his voice so all could hear. "Taza carries burdens like an old woman," he jeered. "Perhaps tomorrow he will fetch wood and grind corn with the captives." The laughter rippled through the group. Another spat into the dirt, shaking his head. "He is bewitched by pale skin and a child's cry. He forgets the path of the warrior." Taza's jaw tightened, but he did not rise. He sat with his back straight, his eyes fixed on the fire. The flames painted his face in gold and shadow, revealing not weakness but resolve. The leader, the man with a hawk feather in his braid, finally spoke. His voice carried above the noise. "Enough." The camp quieted. "Let the boy answer." All eyes turned to Taza. The silence pressed heavy. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, the weight of the moment clear in his posture. He let his gaze pass over the faces of his kin, mocking, curious, expectant before he spoke. "You call me weak because I lifted a child from the dirt. But what honor is there in leaving her to die?" His words were calm, but each syllable struck like a stone. "We fight for land, for vengeance, for our people's survival. That is war. But to cast aside a life too small to fight back, that is not war. That is shame." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Some frowned, others scoffed. One barked a laugh. "Shame? She is the enemy's child. The enemy's blood." Taza turned toward him, his eyes sharp. "And if our children were left crying in the dirt, would their blood make them less ours? Would their cries mean nothing?" The laughter faltered. A few younger warriors shifted uneasily. The older ones glared, unmoved. The leader studied him for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke again. "You speak boldly for one so young. But words do not fill bellies, nor do they keep us safe. You have claimed them. Now you must carry the weight of them." Taza inclined his head. "I will." The leader gave a sharp nod, as though cutting the matter off. "Then let it be so. But remember this, a warrior who chooses a burden must bear it alone. If they fail, no one will pity them." The fire crackled. Taza sat again, unshaken. The mockery did not vanish, but neither did his resolve. He had spoken his truth before them all, and though their scorn burned hot, it did not pierce him. From where she sat, Eliza watched. She could not understand their words, but she saw the way they looked at him, the way he stood against their jeers without flinching. Her heart swelled with something unfamiliar, something like gratitude, something like awe. For the first time since she had been taken, she did not feel like a prisoner alone in the dark. She felt the stirrings of protection, fragile but real, bound not by chains but by choice. And in the firelight, though she could not know it, a bond was being forged, one that would change the course of all their fates. The night settled heavy over the arroyo. The warriors lay stretched near the fires, some already asleep, others murmuring in low tones. Their laughter and scorn had quieted, but the memory of it lingered in the smoke. Crickets chirped from the brush. The stars burned like cold embers overhead. Eliza sat with her back against a rock, her baby nestled in her arms. The ropes that bound her wrists had been loosened, though not removed. Her skin was raw and sore. She dared not shift too much, for every movement risked waking the infant who had, at last, fallen into deep sleep. The child's breathing was steady now, a fragile rhythm that steadied Eliza's own pounding heart. She looked across the camp and saw him, Taza, sitting apart from the others. He was sharpening a knife, his movements slow, deliberate, though she sensed his thoughts were elsewhere. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing not the hardness she had seen in the older warriors, but something quieter, something searching. Eliza did not understand his language, not fully. The words exchanged between him and the others had been sharp, full of weight she could not grasp. Yet she understood enough from his tone, his stance, his eyes. He had stood for her child. When no one else would, she wanted to speak, to thank him. But the distance between them was more than space. It was a gulf of worlds, of culture, of trust not yet built. So she remained silent, watching him, her gratitude unspoken but alive. After a time, he looked up. Their eyes met across the firelight. She startled, clutching the baby tighter, but he did not look away. His gaze held steady, calm, not threatening. Slowly, as though to reassure her, he set the knife aside. He picked up a water skin and drank, then gestured faintly toward her and offered. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. He rose, crossing the camp with quiet steps. Some of the warriors looked up, curious, but none spoke. He stopped a few feet away, crouching so he did not loom over her. He extended the water skin, his hand open, patient. Her throat was parched, but her fear was greater. Still, she forced herself to move. She reached out, awkward with her wrists bound, and took the skin. Their hands brushed for the briefest instant, his warm, steady, hers trembling. She drank, the cool water soothing her dry mouth. Then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, "Thank you." He did not answer, perhaps he did not understand, but his eyes softened as if he did. He nodded once, then sat back on his heels. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Yet it was not empty. The baby stirred, fussing softly. Eliza rocked her, whispering lullabies in a cracked voice. Taza watched, his brow furrowed slightly as though fascinated. Perhaps he had never seen such tenderness, or perhaps he was remembering something lost. When the child quieted again, Eliza dared to glance up. He was still watching, but there was no cruelty in his gaze. Only respect. Something fragile passed between them then. Not words, not promises, only a recognition. She saw in him a man who had made a choice no one else dared make. And he saw in her a mother who would endure anything to keep her child alive. When at last he rose to leave, she felt the absence of his presence like a chill. He returned to his place near the fire, lay back against his saddle, and closed his eyes. But even as sleep crept into camp, Eliza knew one truth. If danger came in the night, it would be his watchful eyes that sought it first, not those of the others who scorned her. The bond was silent, fragile, and unspoken, but it was there, and though neither of them could have named it yet, it was the first thread of trust woven between a captive mother and the young warrior, who had dared to claim her life and her child as his own. Morning came without mercy. The warriors rose before the sun, stamping out fires, tightening saddles, and preparing the captives for the road. The desert air was sharp with cold at dawn, but it would soon grow blistering under the relentless sky. Eliza clutched her child close as she was pulled to her feet. The baby whimpered at the sudden chill, her small body thin from hunger. Eliza's breasts, though aching, had little left to give. Her milk was drying with the stress, and she feared. Each day might be the child's last if nourishment did not come. When the march began, she stumbled often, her body weak. Each time she faltered, the guards barked at her, some shoving her forward with the blunt ends of their spears. Her wrists were no longer bound as tightly as before, but her freedom was only an illusion. She walked because they allowed it, not because she chose to. And always, just behind or beside her, there was Taza. He rode sometimes, walked others, but never strayed far. When she staggered, he steadied her with a quiet hand. When the child cried, he spoke low words in Apache, sounds she could not understand but that seemed to soothe. He gave her water more often than the others would have allowed. He even slipped her pieces of dried meat when no one was watching. Though she knew such defiance could cost him dearly, the band noticed that at night when they camped in canyons or sheltered valleys, whispers spread like embers among dry brush. Some mocked Taza openly, laughing that he had traded his warrior's pride for the burdens of a woman and child. Others grew harsher, muttering that he had cursed himself, dragging weakness into their midst. But not all voices were against him. A few of the younger warriors, still untested in blood, cast sidelong glances toward him, curious, almost admiring. They had seen his boldness when he claimed the captives, when he spoke of honor. They wondered quietly if courage could mean more than the strength of one's arm. Still, tension clung to the group. Eliza felt it every night, the way some looked at her with disdain, the way others avoided looking at her at all. She felt like a stone tied to Taza's back, pulling him down among his own people. And yet, when their eyes met across the firelight, she knew he did not see her that way. He had chosen. He carried her and her child as though they were worth the wait. The journey wore on. Days bled into one another, dusty trails, rocky passes, rivers crossed at dawn. Eliza's feet bled, her strength wavered, but the child endured, clinging to life with the same quiet stubbornness she had shown when left crying in the dirt. One evening, when Eliza could no longer walk, her knees giving way beneath her, Taza acted without hesitation. Before the others could jeer or strike her, he lifted her into his arms as though she weighed no more than a bundle of reeds. With the baby tucked against her, she clung to his shoulders, too weak even to protest. He carried her the rest of the way to camp, his back straight, his steps steady, ignoring the smirks and mutters that followed. That night, the whispers grew sharper. Some mocked him, but others questioned in earnest. Was this foolishness or strength? Was it weakness to carry a burden, or was it a different kind of power to stand against cruelty and not bend? Eliza did not understand their words, but she felt their eyes. She curled around her baby, shielding her from the cold, and watched Taza from the shadows. He sat alone again, apart from the others, sharpening his blade with calm defiance. The firelight caught in his eyes, and for the first time she wondered what it had cost him to make that claim, that one declaration, "Both are mine now." The road ahead stretched long and uncertain, but in the silence between the jeers and the whispers, a truth was forming. His choice had not only altered her fate, it had set him on a new path too, one that might divide him from his people as surely as the line of captives divided the camp. And though neither of them could name it yet, the long journey was becoming more than survival. It was becoming a test of who they were and who they might become. The days bled into weeks. The war band pressed on through the rugged wilderness, through canyons where shadows clung like secrets, over ridges where the wind bit at the skin, and across wide plains where the horizon seemed to stretch into forever. The captives endured, weakened but unbroken. Among them, Eliza walked with her baby cradled against her, surviving each day because of the quiet strength of one man. Taza never wavered. He carried burdens the others mocked, bore responsibilities no one else would touch. He gave water when it meant thirst for himself, shared food when his own stomach knotted with hunger, and shielded the woman and her child from the contempt of his people. Yet for all his care, whispers sharpened. Some warriors began to mutter openly that his claim was foolish, that he was soft, that he had bound himself to weakness. Others, quieter, watched him with something almost like respect. They could not deny what they saw. A young warrior who did not bend even when ridicule. Eliza sensed the division, though she understood little of their words. She saw it in their eyes, mockery from some, grudging acknowledgement from others. But she paid them little mind, for all her focus was on keeping her child alive. Each night when she closed her eyes, she remembered that morning when her baby had been tossed aside, when she thought she had lost her forever, and each morning. When she woke, she looked first at the infant breathing softly beside her, then at the man who had chosen not to leave them. A bond had grown, not through words, they barely shared a language, but through the language of survival. In the smallest of gestures, it lived. The way Taza adjusted his pace so she would not fall behind. The way Eliza passed the child into his arms without hesitation when her own strength faltered. They had become something more than protector and captive, though neither dared name it. One evening, as the sun bled red across the desert sky, the warband stopped in a shallow valley. The leader, weary from the journey, called for rest. Fires were lit and meat roasted. The warriors sat in circles, their shadows stretching long in the dying light. It was then the murmurs rose again. A scarred elder scoffed loudly, gesturing toward Eliza. The boy thinks himself strong because he carries a woman. Let him see what strength means when hunger gnaws and the child sickens. Then he will know the weight of foolishness. The others chuckled. But this time, a younger warrior, barely older than a boy, spoke up. He does what none of us would dare. He stands when we laugh, and he does not break. His voice carried a note of challenge. Perhaps there is strength in that, the camp stilled. The leader's gaze shifted to Taza, who sat with Eliza and the child beside him. His face gave nothing away, but the air was heavy with expectation. Taza rose slowly. He looked at his people, at their jeers, their doubts, their curiosity, and then at Eliza, her baby nestled against her breast. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm, carrying like the crack of distant thunder. I claim them. I did not do it for pride. I did not do it for weakness. I did it because I saw life thrown into the dirt, and I could not ride away. He paused, letting the words settle. You may call me fool, but I will not call myself ashamed. The fire popped. Silence hung over the camp. Then the leader, after a long moment, gave a single nod. So be it. You walk your own path. Whether it leads to honor or ruin, it is yours to bear. The matter ended there, but something had shifted. The mocking still lingered among some, yet others watched Taza with new eyes. He was no longer just a boy among them. He had chosen, and he had not broken beneath the weight of that choice. Eliza, though she understood little of the words, felt the change as well. She looked at him across the fire, her eyes meeting his. No chains bound her heart in that moment. She saw him not only as a captor, nor only as a protector, but as the man who had carried her and her child through fire and dust when no one else would. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, whether it would lead back to her people, or into a future she could not yet imagine, she knew one truth as surely as she knew the warmth of her baby's breath. That day, when the baby had been thrown into the dirt, a new path had opened. A path not of conquest, nor of captivity, but of survival, of trust, of something fragile yet enduring. Taza had claimed them with the words, "Both are mine now." And in time, Eliza realized the truth was larger than words. They were each other's now, bound not by chains, but by choice.